The morning sun rose over New Haven like it did every day, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Children ran through the streets on their way to school, their laughter echoing between the simple buildings that made up the colony. Parents waved from doorways and windows, smiling at the familiar sight. It was the year 2347, and humanity had spread across the stars. But of all the worlds they had settled, New Haven was special. It was a family world, a place where people came to raise their children, far from the busy cities of Earth. Governor Laura Mitchell stood at her office window and watched the children pass by. She had been a teacher once, many years ago, and she still remembered every student she had ever taught. Now she led a colony of 40,000 people, and she considered every single one of them her responsibility. 8,000 of those people were children, and their safety meant everything to her. A knock at her door pulled her attention away from the window. Commander Kevin Torres entered the room with a serious look on his face. He was a tall man with tired eyes, the head of the small defense force that protected the colony. He had taken this quiet posting 3 years ago, so he could spend more time with his 2 daughters. Now he carried a datapad that seemed to weigh more than it should. "Governor, we have a problem," he said. "The Korath have sent another message." Laura felt her stomach tighten. The Korath Dominion was an empire of insect-like aliens whose territory bordered human space. They had been making demands for months now, claiming that the Kepler system belonged to them. Their messages had grown more aggressive with each passing week. What did they want this time? She asked. "The same thing they always want. They say we have 30 days to leave the system. If we refuse, they promise consequences." Laura sat down at her desk and rubbed her temples. She had dealt with difficult situations before, but nothing like this. The Korath were not like other alien species humanity had met. They did not see humans as equals. To them, humans were insects, pests to be removed when they became annoying. "Have you contacted Earth?" she asked. "I sent a message to the Federation Navy this morning. They said they would send reinforcements, but it will take time. The nearest fleet is 3 weeks away." 3 weeks. Laura looked out the window again and saw a group of children playing in the park across the street. They were throwing a ball back and forth, completely unaware of the danger that hung over their heads. She made a decision in that moment. "We are not leaving," she said firmly. "This is our home. The Federation will protect us." Commander Torres nodded, but Laura could see the worry in his eyes. He had 2 daughters of his own. He understood what was at stake. Later that day, Ambassador Zara Venn arrived at the governor's office. She was a thin woman with sharp features and a mind that worked faster than most computers. Her job was to maintain relations with the Korath Dominion, though relations had never been good to begin with. She had spent years studying the Korath, learning their language and their customs, trying to find some way to build peace between their species. Now she feared that all her work had been for nothing. "I spoke with their commander again," Zara said as she sat down across from Laura. "Admiral Thornkith. He is not interested in negotiation. He sees us as beneath him, Governor. All of humanity. He truly believes that we are inferior creatures who do not deserve to exist in their space." "Then he is a fool," Laura replied. "We have just as much right to be here as they do." Zara shook her head sadly. "Right does not matter to the Korath. Only power matters. And right now, they believe they have more power than us." The days passed slowly after that. Commander Torres increased patrols around the colony and began quiet preparations for an evacuation that he hoped would never be needed. Dr. Nathan Price, the chief medical officer at the colony hospital, made sure that all emergency supplies were stocked and ready. He was a gentleman who had dedicated his life to caring for children, and the thought of anything happening to his young patients kept him awake at night. Life in New Haven continued almost normally. Parents still took their children to school. Families still gathered for dinner each evening. The people of the colony trusted their leaders and believed that everything would be fine. But those leaders knew the truth. They knew that the Korath were not making empty threats. On the 27th day, Larver was having dinner with Commander Torres and Ambassador Ven when the alarms began to sound. Torres grabbed his communicator and listened to the frantic voice on the other end. His face went pale. "Korath warships," he said. "At least 50 of them. They just appeared at the edge of the system." Larva stood up so fast that her chair fell over behind her. "That is 3 days early. They said we had 30 days. They lied," Zara said quietly. "The Korath do not believe that lying to inferior species is wrong. To them, we are not worthy of honesty." Torres was already moving toward the door. "I need to get to the defense station. Governor, you should begin the evacuation immediately." "Where will we go?" Lavra asked. "Our transport ships cannot outrun Korath warships." Torres stopped at the door and looked back at her. For a moment, she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Fear. Real fear. "I do not know," he admitted. "But we have to try." He ran out into the night, and Lavra watched him go. Then she turned to the window and looked out at the colony she loved. The streets were already filling with confused people, families holding their children close, everyone looking up at the sky as if they could see the enemy approaching. She knew in her heart that the next few hours would change everything. She just did not know how much. The stars that had always seemed so beautiful now looked cold and distant. And somewhere among them, death was coming for New Haven. The Korath fleet moved through space like a swarm of angry insects. 50 warships, each one bristling with weapons, each one carrying soldiers eager for blood. At the head of the fleet sat Admiral Thornkith in his command chair, his compound, eyes fixed on the small blue world that grew larger in his view screen. He felt nothing but contempt for the creatures that lived there. Humans were soft, weak, emotional. They cared too much about things that did not matter. And that weakness, he knew, would be their downfall. "Target the schools first," he ordered his fleet. "Then the hospitals, then the shelters. Break their spirit before we break their bodies." His officers obeyed without question. The Korath did not understand mercy. They did not understand love. They only understood power, and today they would show these humans what true power looked like. On the surface of New Haven, Commander Kevin Torres stood in the defense station and watched the enemy approach. His hands were steady on the controls, but his heart was racing. He thought of his daughters, Megan and Sophie, and prayed that they had made it to the evacuation channels. He thought of all the children in the colony, all the innocent lives that depended on him. He knew he could not stop the Korath fleet. His defense force was too small, his weapons too weak. But he would fight anyway. He would fight until his last breath. "All stations, open fire," he commanded. The defense platforms around New Haven came alive, sending streams of energy toward the approaching fleet. A few Korath ships took damage, but the rest simply flew through the fire like it was nothing. They were too many, too strong, too well prepared. This was not a battle. It was an execution. High above the colony, Lieutenant Amy Chun watched the attack from her small shuttle. She had been running cargo between the surface and the orbital stations when the Korath arrived. Now she found herself caught in the middle of a nightmare. Enemy ships flew past her, ignoring her tiny vessel as they focused on bigger targets. She saw the defense platforms explode one by one. She saw the Korath begin their bombardment of the surface. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." The first bombs fell on the Eastern District, where the largest school in the colony was located. The building disappeared in a flash of light, and Amy screamed, even though no one could hear her. More bombs fell. More buildings vanished. The Korath were not trying to conquer New Haven. They were trying to destroy it completely. On the ground, 12-year-old Katie Brooks was running through streets filled with smoke and fire. She had been in class when the attack began, and the explosion had thrown her across the room. When she woke up, her teacher was dead, and half her classmates were buried under rubble. She had crawled out through a broken window and started running without knowing where she was going. "Mom!" she screamed. "Dad!" No one answered. The streets were chaos. People ran in every direction, carrying children, dragging injured family members, crying and screaming and praying. Katie saw things that no child should ever see. Bodies in the street, buildings collapsing, Korath soldiers dropping from the sky in armored pods, their weapons cutting down anyone who got in their way. At the hospital, Dr. Nathan Price was trying to save as many patients as he could. The building had taken a direct hit, and half the wards were gone. But the children's wing was still standing, and he would not abandon the young ones in his care. He carried a small boy in his arms and led a group of nurses and children toward the emergency exit. "Stay close to me," he told them. "We are going to be okay." He did not believe his own words, but the children needed to hear them. They needed to believe that someone would protect them. He pushed open the exit door and stepped outside, and the last thing he saw was a Korath soldier raising its weapon. Nathan threw himself over the children, covering them with his body, and the world went white. Some of the children survived because of what he did. They would remember him for the rest of their lives. Commander Torres died at his station when a Korath warship fired directly at the defense center. He never knew if his daughters made it to safety. He never knew that Megan survived, but Sophie did not. He died fighting, which was all he could have asked for. Lieutenant Chun managed to escape the system in her damaged shuttle. She was carrying 17 survivors, including a few children who had made it to the orbital stations before the attack. She also carried recordings from the defense systems, videos that showed exactly what the Korath had done. Every school they had targeted, every hospital they had destroyed, every child they had killed or captured. The attack lasted 6 hours. When it was over, New Haven was a graveyard. Of the 40,000 people who had lived there, less than 5,000 survived. Of the 8,000 children, only 347 were still alive. Many of those were wounded. Many would carry scars for the rest of their lives, and hundreds of children had been taken alive by the Korath, captured for experimentation, for study, to learn how to better destroy humanity in the future. Governor Laura Mitchell survived because she had been in an underground bunker when the worst of the bombing happened. She emerged into a world of ash and silence. The colony she had loved was gone. The children she had promised to protect were dead or missing. She fell to her knees in the ruins and wept out from orbit. Admiral Thornkith looked down at the burning world and felt satisfied. The humans had been punished for their arrogance. Soon they would learn to stay out of Korath space. He ordered his communications officer to send a message to all human worlds, a warning that would teach them to fear the Dominion. "Your young are weak," his message said. "Your species is weak. Leave our territory or more will follow." He expected the humans to cower. He expected them to beg for peace. He expected them to retreat to their core worlds and never challenge the Korath again. He could not have been more wrong. Somewhere in the darkness of space, Lieutenant Chun's shuttle raced toward Earth, carrying the truth of what had happened, carrying evidence of a crime that would unite all of humanity in a single purpose, carrying the spark that would ignite a fire the Korath could never imagine. The day the stars went dark over New Haven was the day humanity changed forever. Lieutenant Amy Chun's shuttle limped into Earth orbit on emergency power. She had not slept in 4 days. She had barely eaten. All she could think about were the recordings stored in her ship's computer The images that played over and over in her mind every time she closed her eyes. Children running, buildings falling, bodies in the streets. The Federation Navy intercepted her shuttle and brought her to the Central Command Station. She told her story to anyone who would listen. She showed them the recordings. She watched their faces change as they saw what the Korath had done. Within hours, the recordings were broadcast across every human world. Every news channel, every public screen, every personal device showed the same images. The attack on New Haven, the deliberate targeting of schools and hospitals, the Korath soldiers hunting children through the burning streets. Admiral Thornkith's message, delivered with cold contempt, and then humanity did something it had not done in 300 years. It stopped fighting with itself. Old enemies became allies. Political arguments were forgotten. Economic disputes no longer mattered. Every human, on every world, in every corner of the galaxy, felt the same emotion at the same moment. Rage. Fleet. Admiral Daniel Carter sat in his office at Earth Command and watched the recordings for the 5th time. He was 63 years old. He had served in 3 wars. He had seen terrible things and done terrible things in the name of protecting humanity. But he had never felt what he felt now. His hands were shaking. There were tears on his face. And behind the tears was something harder, something colder, something that scared even him. His aide knocked on the door. "Admiral, the President is ready to see you." Carter stood and straightened his uniform. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man he barely recognized. The calm, controlled officer was gone. In his place stood something else entirely. President Maria Santos was waiting for him in the war room. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, a diplomat who had spent her entire career building peace. Now she sat at the head of a table surrounded by military commanders, her kind eyes replaced by something much harder. "Tell me what you need," she said to Carter. "Everything," he replied. "Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have, and authorization to use them without restriction." Some of the officers around the table looked uncomfortable. A campaign of total war was something humanity had not attempted in centuries. There were laws against it, treaties that limited what could be done even in war. The Korath targeted children, President Santos said quietly. They experimented on children. They killed 7,000 children and broadcast their triumph to the galaxy. She looked around the table at her advisors. "Tell me why I should show them any mercy at all." No one could answer her. That afternoon, President Santos addressed the Federation Assembly. Billions of people watched across hundreds of worlds. She stood at the podium and spoke in a voice that did not waver. "The Korath Dominion believed they understood humanity," she said. "They believed our love for our children was a weakness. They believed that by hurting the innocent, they could break our spirit and force us to surrender. They were wrong. Our love is not a weakness. It is the source of our greatest strength. And now they will learn what happens when that strength is turned against them." The assembly voted unanimously. Not a single representative from any world, from any faction, voted against the resolution. The Korath Dominion was declared an enemy of all humanity, and the Federation Navy was authorized to do whatever was necessary to ensure that no Korath would ever threaten a human child again. The response from the civilian population was immediate. Recruitment stations were overwhelmed with volunteers. Factories switched from peacetime production to wartime manufacturing overnight. Scientists worked without sleep to develop new weapons, new shields, new ways to fight. People donated money, resources, time, anything they could give to the war effort. Dr. Stephanie Moore was one of those scientists. She had spent 20 years studying the Korath, learning everything she could about their biology and their society. She had hoped her knowledge would help build peace between their species. Now she used it for a different purpose. The Korath have a hive structure, she explained to Admiral Carter. Their queen controls their breeding worlds. If we destroy those worlds, we destroy their ability to reproduce. We end them as a species. Carter nodded slowly. Then that is what we will do. Admiral, Dr. Moore said carefully, I need you to understand what you are agreeing to. This is not a war of conquest. This is extinction. We would be wiping out an entire civilization. They murdered 7,000 children, Carter replied. They took hundreds more for experiments. They broadcast their atrocity to the galaxy and dared us to respond. He leaned forward, his eyes cold. I understand exactly what I am agreeing to. The human fleet assembled in the orbit of Mars. 2,400 warships, ranging from small destroyers to massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons. 50 million ground troops trained and equipped for planetary assault. The largest military force humanity had ever created, gathered for a single purpose. Captain Ryan Hughes stood on the bridge of the dreadnought, relentless, and looked out at the assembled fleet. He had served in the Navy for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like this. Ships stretched across the void as far as he could see, a wall of steel and fire ready to be unleashed. His communications officer reported that Admiral Carter was broadcasting to the fleet. Hughes ordered the message put on speakers. Soldiers of humanity, Carter's voice said, we do not go to conquer. We do not go to negotiate. We do not go to make peace. We go to ensure that no species, anywhere in this galaxy, ever harms a human child again. We go to teach the universe a lesson it will never forget. We go to show them what happens when you touch our young. There was a pause. Then Carter spoke again, his voice hard as iron. All ships, set course for Korath space. It is time. The fleet began to move, 2,400 points of light streaming toward the stars. And somewhere in the darkness, the Korath Dominion had no idea what was coming for them. The human fleet crossed into Korath space without warning. There was no declaration of war, no final ultimatum, no chance for surrender. Admiral Carter had made his decision. Words were useless against creatures who saw humans as insects. Only action would matter now. The first Korath defense station detected the approaching fleet and sent a warning to the Dominion command. The message never arrived. Human ships had already destroyed the communication relays, cutting off the border systems from the rest of the Empire. The Korath defenders found themselves alone, facing an enemy they could not contact and could not escape. Captain Ryan Hughes led the assault from the bridge of the Relentless. His ship carved through Korath defenses like a knife through paper. The enemy fought back, but their weapons seemed weak compared to the fury of the human fleet. Ships that would have given any other species trouble were destroyed in seconds. Stations that had stood for centuries were reduced to debris. They are retreating, his tactical officer reported. The remaining Korath vessels are falling back to the inner systems. Do not let them escape, Hughes ordered. Chase them down. Destroy them all. The fleet spread across Korath space like a wave of fire. World after world fell before them. Military bases were obliterated. Shipyards were reduced to ash. The Korath had never faced an enemy like this. Other species fought with caution, with strategy, with concern for their own losses. Humans fought as if they did not care whether they lived or died. They fought with a rage that the Korath could not understand. On the ground, the war was even more brutal. Sergeant Chris Palmer led his squad through the burning streets of a Korath city, searching for signs of human prisoners. The intelligence report said that captured children had been brought here to a research facility on the edge of the settlement. He would find them or die trying. Sergeant, contact the head, one of his soldiers reported. Korath Patrol, 8 units. Take them down, Palmer ordered. The fight was short and bloody. The Korath soldiers were trained warriors, but they were not prepared for humans who had seen the recordings from New Haven. They were not prepared for enemies who fought with absolute determination, who took wounds without stopping, who kept coming even when they should have fallen. Palmer stepped over the bodies of the fallen Korath and continued toward the facility. His guide was a young woman named Megan Torres, the daughter of Commander Torres, who had died defending New Haven. She had survived the attack and volunteered for the Liberation Forces as soon as she was old enough. Now she led rescue teams through Korath territory, using her knowledge of the enemy to find human prisoners. "The facility is just ahead," Megan said. "Through that door." Palmer nodded to his squad. They moved forward carefully, checking for traps, watching for ambush. The door was locked, but a well-placed explosive took care of that. They rushed inside, weapons ready. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Korath had been experimenting on the captured children, testing their limits, studying their responses to pain and fear and loneliness. The scientists had kept detailed records of everything they had done. Some of the children were still alive, locked in cells, their eyes empty and hollow. Others were not so lucky that Palmer felt something break inside him. He had been a soldier for 15 years. He had seen death and suffering on a dozen worlds. But this was different. This was evil in its purest form. "Get the survivors out of here," he said quietly. "Call for medical evacuation, and burn this place to the ground." Among the survivors was Katie Brooks, the 12-year-old girl who had escaped through the streets of New Haven during the attack. She had been captured 2 days later and brought to this facility. She had survived 3 months of horror that no child should ever experience. When the human soldiers found her, she did not speak. She did not cry. She simply looked at them with eyes that had seen too much. A medic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and led her toward the evacuation shuttle. As she walked past Sergeant Palmer, she stopped and looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken in weeks. Palmer knelt down so he was at her level. "You are safe now," he said. "No one will ever hurt you again. I promise." The stories of the rescued children spread through the fleet. Every soldier heard what the Korath had done. Every crew member saw the reports. And with each revelation, their determination grew stronger. This was not just a war anymore. This was justice dot in the heart of the Dominion. Hive Queen Selathanor watched her empire crumble. She had ruled the Korath for 50 years, expanding their territory, crushing their enemies, building a civilization that she believed would last forever. Now it was falling apart around her. "Send a message to the humans," she ordered her advisors. "Offer them peace. Return all prisoners. Pay whatever reparations they demand. Just make them stop." The message was sent. Admiral Carter received it on the bridge of his flagship. He read it carefully, considering each word. His officers waited in silence. "Send a reply," Carter said finally. "Tell the Hive Queen that the time for mercy was before they touched our children. Tell her that no amount of payment can return the dead. Tell her that we are not coming to negotiate. We are coming to end this." The fleet continued its advance. World after world fell. The Korath military, once the terror of the galaxy, was shattered and scattered. Their soldiers fought bravely, but bravery was not enough against an enemy that had nothing left to lose. Within 2 months, human forces reached the edge of the Korath home system. The breeding worlds lay before them, the heart of the Dominion's civilization. Billions of Korath lived there, including countless young who had nothing to do with the attack on New Haven. Admiral Carter looked at the tactical display and felt the weight of what he was about to do. This would be the end of an entire species. History would remember this moment forever. He thought of the recordings from New Haven. He thought of the children in the research facility. He thought of little Katie Brooks and her empty eyes. "All ships," he commanded, "prepare for final assault." The long night was about to fall on the Korath Dominion. The Korath homeworld hung in space like a pale jewel, surrounded by the shattered remains of its defense fleet. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the world that had given birth to an empire. Billions of lives existed on that surface. Families, communities, children who had never heard of New Haven and never asked for this war. He thought about what he was about to do. He thought about the cost of vengeance and the price of peace. He thought about whether there was any other way. Then he remembered the recordings. The schools burning, the children screaming, Dr. Nathan Price dying to protect his patients, Commander Torres fighting to the end. 7,000 children who would never grow up, never fall in love, never have families of their own. "Open a channel to the surface," he ordered. "All frequencies." The communications officer nodded. "Channel open, Admiral." Carter spoke slowly and clearly, making sure every word would be understood. "This is Admiral Daniel Carter of the United Earth Federation. Your military has been destroyed. Your empire has fallen. What happens next depends on you. I am giving your civilian population 6 hours to evacuate the breeding centers. Anyone who wishes to leave may do so. We will not fire on unarmed transports. But when those 6 hours are over, we will complete our mission. This is the only warning you will receive." He cut the channel and turned to his officers. Some of them looked relieved that he had offered the evacuation. Others looked disappointed. He understood both reactions. "Admiral," Captain Hughes said quietly, "do you think they will take the offer? Some will, most will not. The Korath do not surrender. They do not flee. They will stay and die with their world because they cannot imagine any other choice." Carter shook his head slowly. "That is why they will never understand us. They think our compassion makes us weak. They do not realize that it makes us different from them. We give them a choice. They never gave our children any choice at all." The 6 hours passed slowly. Some Korath transports did leave, carrying civilians who wanted to live more than they wanted to die with pride. Most stayed, just as Carter had predicted. When the time was up, the Admiral gave the order. The bombardment lasted 3 days. When it was over, the Korath homeworld was silent. The breeding centers were gone. The hive structures were ash. An empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years had been reduced to scattered refugees without a home. Without a government, without hope. President Maria Santos broadcast a message to every species in the galaxy. Her face was tired but determined as she spoke. "We are not conquerors," she said. "We do not seek empire. We do not wish to rule over others or take what is not ours. But there is one line that cannot be crossed. Harm our children, and we will find you. Harm our children, and we will destroy everything you have built. Harm our children, and we will erase your civilization from existence. This is not a threat. It is a promise. Remember New Haven. Remember what happened to those who hurt our young. And choose your actions wisely." The message was received across thousands of worlds, by hundreds of species. Some were horrified by what humanity had done. Others were impressed. All of them were afraid that, in the months that followed, the surviving Korath were scattered across the galaxy. They were forbidden from forming a government, forbidden from building military forces, forbidden from gathering in numbers greater than a few thousand. They had become refugees in a universe that wanted nothing to do with them. Their great dominion was nothing more than a memory and a warning. While New Haven, the work of rebuilding began. Governor Laura Mitchell returned to the colony she had loved, walking through streets that were still filled with rubble and ash. She had aged 20 years in the past few months. Her hair was gray. Her eyes were tired. But she refused to let New Haven die. "We will rebuild. she told the survivors who gathered around her. We will plant gardens where the bombs fell. We will build schools where our children died. We will make this place beautiful again, not because we want to forget what happened here, but because we want to prove that they did not destroy us. They took so much from us, but they could not take our spirit. They could not take our hope. Megan Torres stood in the crowd, listening to the governor speak. She had lost her father and her sister in the attack. She had spent months fighting through Korath space, rescuing prisoners, killing enemies. Now she was home, standing in the ruins of the place where she had grown up. She did not know how to feel Dodd after the ceremony. She walked to the construction site where workers were building the memorial. It would be a wall of black stone, tall enough to be seen from orbit, with the names of every child who had died in the attack. 7,653 names, carved into the stone so that no one would ever forget. Katie Brooks was there too, sitting on a pile of bricks and watching the workers. She was 13 now, a survivor who had seen things that no child should ever see. The doctors said she was recovering. Some days were better than others. Are you okay? Megan asked, sitting down beside her. Katie thought about the question for a long time. I do not know, she finally said. Sometimes I think about what happened and I feel like I will never be okay again. But then I remember that I am still here. I survived. And I think maybe that means something. Megan nodded. It does. It means you are stronger than they knew. It means they could not break you. Admiral Carter retired quietly after the war. He never spoke publicly about the campaign. He never wrote memoirs or gave interviews. He simply disappeared into civilian life, a man who had done terrible things for the right reasons and would carry that weight for the rest of his days. 50 years later, a young alien diplomat visited Earth for the first time. He was from a species that had been children themselves when the Korath War happened, and he had grown up hearing stories about humanity's fury. Now he walked through the halls of the Federation Assembly, marveling at the humans around him, trying to understand what made them so different from other species. He found an elderly human ambassador sitting alone in a garden, looking up at the stars. The diplomat approached cautiously and asked if he could sit down. The ambassador smiled and nodded. I have always wondered, the young diplomat said, why your species is so feared throughout the galaxy. You are not the strongest. You are not the most advanced. But everyone is afraid of you. Why? The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out a small device and activated a holographic image. It showed a wall of black stone covered with names, stretching up toward a pale sky. That is the memorial on New Haven, the ambassador said quietly. 7,653 children. That is why the galaxy fears us. Because we remember. Because we never forget. And because anyone who harms our children learns that there is no place in the universe where they can hide from our anger. The young diplomat looked at the image for a long time. He thought about his own children, safe at home, and he understood. I hope, he said carefully, that my species never makes the same mistake. The old ambassador smiled sadly. So do we, so do we. Above them, the stars shone cold and bright, watching a galaxy that had learned to fear humanity's love for its young.